Hello everyone, this is Chromý and together we will continue the course Interdisciplinary Approaches to Language and its Use. This is the first out of the 4 presentations which will be devoted to the acquisition of words. There are several important research questions we may ask when we consider learning words. First, we may ask, how do children learn words? This is a very complex question, as we will see in the further presentations. Another question is, what factors actually influence the process? For example, can the knowledge of syntax help us to acquire the meaning of a certain word? And the third question is whether there are any tendencies in the process of word learning. For example, do we learn words in the same rate during the childhood, or is there a gradual increase in the rate of acquisition? Many findings we will present here will be based on an important study by Larry Fenson and his colleagues, Variability in Early Communicative Development. This is a so-called norming study, which means that it aims to find a norm or a general tendency in early communicative development. It covers the period between 8 and 30 months of age, and it is based on data from parental questionnaires. In principle, this method is based on asking parents what their child can or cannot do. This method has obvious limitations, since the parents may have somehow biased conception of their child's abilities. However, the data based on parental questionnaires do correspond to data based on the observations, such as recordings of spontaneous speech. In other words, we may say that parental questionnaires are a very useful source of information on the early stages of language acquisition. Larry Fenson and his colleagues employed MacArthur-Bates Communicative Development Inventories, which are known as CDI. This is a source of standardized parent report instruments, which can serve to analyze the early stages of language development until 3 years of age. The information about these inventories may be found under this link. Importantly, MacArthur-Bates Communicative Development Inventories contain numerous adaptations for other languages than English, such as Spanish, German, Czech, Dutch, Polish, Romani, Italian, Japanese, Inuktitut, and many other. One of the important aspects of early word acquisition is that there is a substantial difference between the words the child knows and the words the child actually uses. On this slide, we can see 2 plots adopted from the study by Larry Fenson and his colleagues. The plot on the left side describes the number of words English children understand between 8 and 16 months of age. The plot on the right side captures the words English children actually produce in this period of life. It would be no surprise if I would tell you that children differ widely in their linguistic abilities at this age. There are 5 lines. The most important one is the median line, which is the measure of central tendency. In other words, median values are the values precisely in the middle of the data. You can see that already in 8 months of age, median of understood words is about 20 words, whereas for produced words, the median is 0. Around 13 months, median of understood words is already above 100, but children only start to produce words, and the median is around 10 produced words. The other lines represent various percentiles. 90th percentile represents a value which is higher than 90% of other values in the data. 25th percentile represents a value which is higher than 25% of other values in the data. In other words, only 25% of children should have a lower vocabulary than is delimited by the line for 25th percentile. This is a similar plot as the right one on the previous slide. Only the x-axis has changed. These are the results for children from 16 to 30 months of age. we can see that the number of words they produce is steadily growing. Look at the median results. In 16 months, median is somewhere around 50 produced words, whereas in 28 months, it is around 500. This reflects the rapid pace with which children are learning words. This rapid vocabulary growth is a reason why researchers sometimes talk about the so-called vocabulary spurt. We will address the rate of acquisition of words in a more detail in the last presentation, which will be concerned with learning words. Until now, we talked about parental reports as a data source for word acquisition research. Importantly, there are also other sources. Perhaps the most widely used corpus resource is Child Language Data Exchange System, which is known under the acronym CHILDES. CHILDES contains acquisition corpora of various languages of the world, and it is freely available on the website childes.talkbank.org. You should definitely have a look at that and find a resource for your own language. What we saw a few slides ago was that according to the parental reports, babies start to produce their first words around the age of 12 months. Some earlier, some later. However, it is often quite problematic to determine whether a child really learned the word or not. For example, some words like mama are easily mistaken with babbling when the child just repeats syllables. Also, the problem is that the first words are often used incorrectly from the adult perspective. The meanings of first words tend to be quite unstable. Here are some examples of first words. In the table, you can find the words which are most frequent in the age of 1 year in English and Spanish. You can see that from a grammatical perspective, these are nouns and interjections, which is fairly typical for early speech. Also, you can see that some words are present in both lists, like daddy and papa, mommy and mama, and so on. As I already said, the first words tend to have an unstable meaning. For example, a child may name an apple with the word ball. This seems as an incorrect use of the word, at least from the adult perspective. However, the question is whether this child does not know the meaning of the word ball, or whether it tries to convey a certain communicative intent with a very limited resources. In case you know only several words, it makes sense to use them creatively to be communicatively successful. In the literature, there is a distinction between overextensions and underextensions. Overextensions are cases when a child uses a given word for more entities than would be correct, such as the example with the word ball for an apple. Underextensions are cases when a child restricts the extension of the word and uses a word for less entities than would be correct. For example, if the word ball would be used only for certain types of balls, but not others. In 1980, Leslie Riscorla published a study on overextensions in early language development in English. She analyzed first 75 produced words of 6 children between 1 year and 1 year and 8 months of age. What she found was that overextensions were present in about 1/3 of cases. She further classified these overextensions to 3 groups. The most common type are categorical overinclusions. These are cases when a word is used to label a different but very close category, such as horse for goat. A less common type were predicate statements. This is a type of overextension when the child is not really labeling the referent, but uses a word which is in some relation to the referent, such as a doll for a crib with no doll in it. And the least frequent type were analogical overextensions, which are the cases when the child uses a word which refers to something perceptually similar to the real referent, such as ball for an apple, or a comb for a centipede, or so. The question we will address in the further presentation is what is actually needed to learn words. There are various possible factors which influence word learning. For example, it is clear that we need to have certain innate abilities, as we already said before. But there is more than that. We will focus on the input needed to learn a word. Then we will consider two principles which are called whole object bias and mutual exclusivity assumption. And then we move our focus to social cognition and its influence on word learning, and we will conclude with the influence of syntax on word learning. Before we will conclude this presentation, I have one reading tip for you. If you are interested in the content of children's first words, you should read the study by Twila Tardif and her colleagues who analyzed large samples of English, Mandarin and Cantonese infants based on the parental reports. What they found out was that there are substantial cross-linguistic differences in the types of words produced in the earliest stages of vocabulary learning. Also, I have one exercise for you. Visit the website wordbank.stanford.edu and go through the vocabulary norms and item norms for a language you select. If it is in the database, try your native language and then try some other language you know. Think about the differences and commonalities you will find. That is all from me now. See you next time.